Kia ora everyone. Today I'm going to read for you a big book written by one of my absolute favourite children's authors, Jill Eagleton, and lots of you will know the story. It's called Mrs. O'Malley in Alligator Alley. If we look at the front cover, I wonder what the story could be about. If you don't know what the story is about, have we think about it. Have a look at the pictures to give you some clues. You'll see at the very front there's a lady, her name's Mrs. O'Malley. She's the main character. In the background there are quite a few alligators. An alligator alley, not really a place I'd want to go to. I wonder what it is. I think we'll have to read on and find out. So as I said, the author is Jill Eagleton and the illustrator of the story is a man called Philip Webb. So Philip Webb's job was to draw the pictures in this story. As we read the story, I want you to have a wee think about some of the interesting or some of the wow words that come up in the book. There are some really interesting words that Jill Eagleton uses, and there's lots of punctuation that we're going to talk about too, full stops, exclamation marks, speech marks, and I know that lots of you have already been learning about lots of those punctuation marks too, so hopefully this will be just a nice wee reminder for you about why we have them when we're reading and how they can help us with our reading and also with our writing. So sit back, relax, enjoy the story, and of course if you can read it clearly from where you're sitting, please join in with me while I'm reading it to you. So it's called Mrs. O'Malley in Alligator Alley. Mrs. O'Malley loved to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. One day she got a letter from the mayor. It said, "Dear Mrs. O'Malley, please do not dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. Alligators live there. Yours sincerely, the mayor." What's a mayor? Have we think about that? Some of you will have heard of that word before, a mayor. The mayor is someone who helps to look after our community and our area and helps to keep us safe along with lots of other people. And this mayor does not think it's very safe for Mrs. O'Malley to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. Dilly-dally, that was when I was reading this story, that was a wow word I came up with. Really interesting word. So dilly-dally, in other words, don't just wander around doing nothing. She probably shouldn't be in Alligator Alley anyway. Let's read on. Mrs. O'Malley was cross. She went to see the mayor and she said, "I want to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. I want to dilly-dally, I do. If alligators snap their jaws at me, I will just say, shoo, shoo, shoo." Shoo, shoo, shoo. Have a think about that. What does shoo, shoo, shoo mean? It's actually meaning go away, go away, go away. Shh, shh, shh. I like that shh sound. There are so many words that we know of that start like shh, shoo, shop, ship, shape, all sorts of words. Have a wee think about it, and when we finish the story, you can go around your house and see how many shh words you can come up with. Shh, shh, shh. It's a very, very popular sound that we use lots. There are lots and lots of words with the sh sound in it. But the mayor said, "Don't be silly. Mrs. O'Malley, alligators are fierce." Fierce. There's another interesting word. Fierce means really like strong and or could be a little bit violent, maybe not very nice. Mrs. O'Malley was cross. So she went downtown and she said to the people in the street, "I want to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. I want to dilly-dally, I do. If alligators snap their jaws at me, I will just say shoo, shoo, shoo." And we know that means go away, go away, go away. But the people in the street said, "Don't be silly, Mrs. O'Malley. Alligators are ferocious." Oh, there's a fantastic word. Imagine using that word in your writing. Ferocious. I wonder what ferocious means. He's like really strong and really fierce. Mrs. O'Malley was cross. She went home to think, "I could tie up the alligator's jaws, but alligators are fierce. I could take the alligators somewhere else, but alligators are ferocious. I know, I could make a net for Alligator Alley." Now there's a good idea. And probably a better idea than trying to tie up their jaws. It would be a little bit tricky to do with alligators, I would be thinking. Moving them somewhere else because they're so ferocious, they're so strong and a bit dangerous. I don't think that would be a very good idea, but making a net for the alligators, what a great idea, Mrs. O'Malley. So Mrs. O'Malley made a net. It was huge. It was humongous. It was like a giant web. And the alligators loved it. You'll notice here that this word here, humongous, is written in big, bold writing. That is so that when we're reading it, we can use lots and lots of expression and almost shout the word. And we know that the word humongous means really, really big. Okay? So we could use a really, really big voice when we're reading it. Mrs. O'Malley said to the alligators, I want to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. I want to dilly-dally, you see. And you can snap and snap your jaws, but you won't snap me. Look at these amazing webs she has made, or nets that look like webs. They are fantastic. Mrs. O'Malley went to sleep on the grass, but when she woke up, there were people everywhere, and they were shouting, look at that net, it is huge, it is humongous, it is like a giant web. Now we can dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. So the reason why the people are thinking that they can dilly-dally in Alligator Alley now is because the alligators can't get out, because Mrs. O'Malley is so creative and has come up with this amazing net to keep the alligators where they are so they can't get out for other people. So now other people can come and dilly-dally. You can have a look at these people dilly-dallying in Alligator Alley. This person's taking photos, walking the dog, picking flowers, so they're not in a really big hurry to leave. They're dilly-dallying. But Mrs. O'Malley said, no, you can't. I want to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. I want to dilly-dally, I do. I want to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley, so shoo, shoo, shoo. Wow, said the people, and they ran away shouting, Mrs. O'Malley is fierce, Mrs. O'Malley is ferocious. We can't dilly-dally in Alligator Alley, not with Mrs. O'Malley. So it was no longer the alligators that were scaring the people off, it was Mrs. O'Malley. I think she thinks she's in charge of Alligator Alley now. Yeah, so that was a pretty interesting story about dealing with alligators in an alley. So what I'd like you to have we think about now is what would you do? How would you get rid of those alligators if you happen to come across some in Alligator Alley? So Mrs. O'Malley thought about tying them up. She thought about catching them or moving them, and then she came up with a much better idea of making a net for them, which I think was probably the best idea as well. As we're reading the story, it's really important that we think about the punctuation that's used. So Jill Eagleton has used lots and lots of punctuation in her story. Okay, she has definitely used full stops. Now we know in our writing that we need to use full stops, capital letters, lots. Okay, we know that we need to use full stops at the end of a sentence. We know that we need to use capital letters at the beginning of a sentence. For people's names, see how Mrs. O'Malley has got a capital letter because that's her name, so she has to have a capital letter. Over here we've got one day, so one is the beginning of the sentence, capital letter. Okay, full stop at the end. We know that a sentence is a group of words that go together that make sense. Okay, so we start with a capital letter, we end our sentence with a full stop. Let's see what other punctuation marks Jill Eagleton has used in Mrs. O'Malley's story. She has used ellipses, dot, 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 which we know means there's more to come. So listen to this. One day she got a letter. It said, dot, 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 and then it goes on to read the letter. Okay. Jill Eagleton has also used speech marks. Now these come up quite a lot in her story, and speech marks are used when a character in the story is talking, and we can change our voice to make it sound more interesting. So I'm going to read this page again, and I want you to join in with me this time, and we'll try and change our voice to make us sound a little bit like Mrs. O'Malley might sound. There are no speech marks up here, so we're just going to read this in just our normal reading voice, but we want to make our reading sound smooth. We want to make it sound like we are talking. Mrs. O'Malley was cross. She went to see the mayor and she said, I want to dilly-dally in Alligator Alley. I want to dilly-dally, I do. If alligators snap their jaws at me, I will just say shoo, shoo, shoo. And look at that in big, bold print as well, like we talked about before. Exclamation marks. That also helps us add expression when we're reading. So we need to remember to do that when we're reading too. So there are lots and lots of punctuation marks used in all stories that we read. So perhaps when you're reading your story today, your own choice of books that you're reading, I'd like you to have a look at what punctuation marks you can find in your story and why you think the author has chosen to use them. It might be a question mark, maybe it's being used at the end of a question. Maybe it's an exclamation mark like Jill Eggleton used. Maybe there are speech marks that the author has chosen to use because someone in the story is talking. I have a challenge for you. After reading our story together, Mrs. O'Malley and Alligator Alley, we know that Mrs. O'Malley, as I said before, came up with some ways or thought of some ways to try and get rid of the alligators so that it was a safe place to dilly-dally. Tying up their jaws wasn't going to work. Neither was removing the alligators. So she came up with making a net that looked a lot like a web, probably a bit like a spider's web maybe, but it would have to be a lot stronger than a spider's web. What I'm going to get you to do, if you can, if you have got at home any string or wool, then you can have a go at using that to help you, or you can just draw. It's absolutely fine. But I'd like you to see if you can draw some alligators. Okay, you can draw the alley that they would be in, and with your wool or string, see if you can create a web or a net that you think would be able to catch the alligators. And if you haven't got string or wool, that's absolutely fine. As I said, you can just draw it, or you might use some cotton, get creative. You might have elastic, anything like that at all. I'd love to see these amazing designs. So hopefully you might be able to share them when you have your class chat next time. Thanks everyone, take care. Hope to see you all soon.